families, it was very common because their families needed as much help as they needed to, so they didn't get the opportunity to go to school, so instead they had to go and work. And this was unfortunate because it allowed the trend to continue for unskilled workers, because if you weren't going to school, you weren't learning how to read and write and do math, which are basic skills you had to know how to do in order to eventually become a more skilled job and to get paid more. So they're stuck in the circle of unskilled jobs and always getting less money than they really should because they weren't able to learn. Now this right here, we like to call him Timmy. He's a can boy, and one of his jobs was to carry around trays of cans all throughout the factory. So he would take them to where they needed to be distributed. Because before machines, this was done by people, and mostly young boys like him. And so Timmy would walk around, get the cans from where they were made, take them to be sealed, take them to be filled with food, and then take them to be cooked. Now they sealed the cans before they cooked them, because what they would do is they would leave a hole in the top of the lid. And so what they would do is they would have, this can body is too small for these lids, but once they were sealed, they would look like this. And that way the ladies who were usually the fillers could take spoonfuls of food and put them into the can, and then they would just cover that hole either with a thin piece of rubber or a thin piece of metal. That way once it was purchased in a grocery store, it could be easily taken out. This is the way they made cans for a very long period of time. Now by putting the food into the cans before it was cooked, that meant that the metal or whatever it was used to seal the cans together would usually seep in. At first they were using lead, and then discovered until later that lead was very unhealthy for people and you could potentially die from lead poisoning. So eventually they changed the cans to use aluminum and tin, which helped a little better. They didn't seal them with lead, but for a long time they were experimenting on how to work these cans and the healthiest way to make them, because they took them a while to realize that these were causing sicknesses. Now if you guys notice, Timmy, what doesn't he have on?
Shoes.
Shoes, yeah, it's pretty common because shoes are expensive. Shoes also, just like Timmy here, I mean kids and like Timmy, their feet are growing every single year, so they keep getting new shoes. And it's a big problem because if you can't afford one pair, your shoes are either never going to fit you properly or just going to go without them. But you guys can imagine walking around this floor without any shoes on, it'd be pretty awful. There'd be metal shards where the cans are being made, oyster goo and shells everywhere, and you could get splinters. It's a pretty dangerous place, especially when machines started being invented. Because if you guys notice machines like this, both of these machines are pretty open. Machines today, the engine parts of the machines are usually covered so you can't get hurt or potentially get your hand stuck. But all these machines are very open, which kids working in factories, either curious or making mistakes, they could easily get their hand caught in there. Especially because they liked having children in the factory, because if something went wrong, their hands were usually small enough to get inside the machine or whatever what was happening to try to fix it. But this was bad for them because they would easily get hurt trying to fix the machine as well. So factories were very dangerous places, especially for children. Now, eventually Timmy would get tired walking around, his feet would get sore, and he would sit down, and Mr. Platt, he would walk around and observe his employees. And he'd see kids like Timmy not doing their job. He figured there has to be a better way to get these cans distributed throughout the factory. So in 1881, this opportunity came. 1881 is when Baltimore got electricity. Not every single house would have gotten electricity right away, but a lot of the factories did, which allowed them to invent machines to make our lives easier. And so this right here is a vertical conveyor belt. It was invented around this time. This vertical conveyor belt is similar to any conveyor belt you guys have seen in either grocery stores or airports. It works the same way, just getting objects from one place to the other. And I can show you guys how it works if you stay right where you are. Now we have the cans come back to where we started them, where I grabbed them from, so we can show you guys how this machine works. But in reality, this track would lead to at each section of the factory and take the cans where they needed to go. They only needed a few can boys to feed cans into the machine like I did. Other than that, most of the kids would have lost their jobs. This trend continues even up until today, where we are constantly inventing machines that take jobs away from people. They still always need people to operate those machines, but a lot of people lose their jobs because of that, especially in the late 1800s when machines were being invented. Now this one right here, this is a filler machine. Before this, previously, women were usually the fillers and they filled the cans manually. But how this worked, this made it a little faster. The cans were put into the machine, they food poured into here, and they would push it out as the cans were being filled. Eventually they invented a machine that could seal the cans as well, so it took two jobs away. Now I can't show you guys how this one works because it works off of a separate engine. So this right here is a wheel, and then a belt would be connected to it, which would then be connected to an engine, and it would run that way. They would use the belt system because it allowed them to run multiple machines, usually off of one engine. Now, these machines usually at first didn't work extremely fast, but they were always worth the money because even though they were expensive, you could pay one flat payment to buy the machine, and then eventually it would earn its money back because instead of paying people to do the same job every week. So this was always worth their money and their investment to invest into machines, especially when technology started rising. Now, how cans were usually cooked, usually in big vats of hot water. It would take a very long time for them to heat up because, as you guys know, if you ever cooked anything like spaghetti, it takes a long time for any pot of hot water to heat up, especially something as large as a big vat. But eventually they discovered that in the early 1800s that salt lowered the boiling temperature of water, which allowed them to cook it a little bit faster, but still, often the cans on the outside edge of the tray sitting in the water wouldn't get cooked all the way. But you can't tell by looking at a can if it's closed if the can's cooked or not. So what they would do is they would leave the cans that were questionable on the windowsill, wait a few days. If it didn't explode from the bacteria growing inside, that means it was good to sell. Obviously not a good way of cooking things if half your cans, or even a quarter of them, are exploding and not getting cooked all the way. So they came up with a new invention. In 1874, the Shriver brothers invented the steamer retort. The steamer retort is right behind you. You guys can go ahead and take a look inside. Just watch your hands as you reach out. It's about 8 feet deep. You can hold 5 of those big trays and hold 100 cans each. You can cook 500 cans in 30 minutes. It's a lot faster than the hot water. And this is a great piece of technology because we still use it today. If you guys have ever used or even seen somebody cooking crabs or any other kind of food in a pressure cooker, it uses the same technology, and we still cook our cans this way too. Now how it works is the trays would be lowered into the pot. The lid would be sealed down by the latches on the outside of it, and then after it was completely closed off and no air could escape, they would have a gas-powered fire on the outside of it, which would gradually heat the whole steamer up and allow steam and pressure to build inside. This cooked the cans completely every time, and so they could cook 500 cans every single time they used it. It did make it a little more dangerous to cook items because it could explode easily if it wasn't completely enclosed. The pressure building inside would get too great and it could explode open. So it was a dangerous job, and that made it semi-skilled because of the danger and because someone had to know how to operate that machine well. It was usually done by men. You can see in this picture here. It'd be pretty strong to lift the trays up and down. But it still was a pretty dangerous job. Now if you guys look through that doorway, don't go inside because there's no reason to, but above the mantle there's that picture is Mr. Platt, and so he's the man who owned the factory.